for Sandy at Nora's podcast.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Sandy.
What is up? How you doing? How's it going?
Well, remember how I felt like last week I was like, oh my God, I'm barely surviving? Well, this week I am still barely surviving.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, now you're like at least 7 days into being a pro at barely surviving.
No, I'm more than that.
Silver lining? No, I sure know that.
It's like I served 3 or was involved in serving 3 legal actions like together last week. And so it's like that takes a lot out of you and it sucks to do. And they're all for different things. And some of them are public and some of them have nothing to do with anything public. So it doesn't matter. But it's just like, God, my book isn't writing itself and I am tired with the world.
Do you ever take a look at your life and think back to when you were like a teenager and think to yourself, I never really thought that I would have been involved in that many legal anythings?
You know, this might surprise you, Sandy, but no, I fully thought I'd be like in something like this.
I have that thought sometimes. I definitely have that thought sometimes. I'm like, I never thought that I would be involved in so many legal things, but here we are. I'm sorry. That's really shitty. I know what it's like to have your whole life taken over by legal shit. It sucks, but I'm very much looking forward to your book. So I do hope that you have some time to eke out the time to do the thing that you really want to do.
Mm-hmm. I am. Yeah. You know what? Someday, someday. But
and you have started recording the Daily News podcast in the evening, really late in the evening. And I hope that helps. And you asked on the Daily News podcast how folks thought about it and to ask them to give you some feedback. So I'm just repeating that here. If folks have any feedback for Nora on the shift to how she's recording the Daily News, if you've even noticed it, let her know.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And some folks were in touch. So thank you for that feedback. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. I have been, doing what I can to support the folks who are doing what they can on campuses. And, I think we should talk about that again this week. I am, I'm just like really, I feel like a few weeks ago we had this discussion where I was like, I'm not sure, I'm feeling kind of depressed about this not happening. And now I'm feeling much more optimistic and inspired and hopeful about the organizing efforts. And there's lots to say on that. And I'm also feeling really starkly aware of how okay it has been to attack protesters, journalists alike, who are simply doing what they can to oppose genocide on campus. Wow. The stark reminder of where we are in the creeping fascism that continues to take over our societies. Awful.
Totally. But there was something kind of really cool this past week. I don't know if you saw this, but the Toronto Star did a big feature on our friend John Camille Farah.
I did see that.
You saw that. Yeah. So folks should check that out.
It's really amazing. And of course, in case you don't remember, John Camille Farah is the person whose lovely music you just heard in the intro and that you will hear in the outro to this episode and all of our episodes. Thank you, John, and congratulations on that great feature.
Totally. Got a little bit more gratitude to give out.
I love gratitude. Who are we thanking?
So this week, thank you to everybody who is sharing the podcast. I feel like we don't say enough, like, please share this, but maybe we say it too much. But we really do rely on you to share the podcast. So whether or not you've got the means to actually support the podcast financially, share. That would be awesome. And I've been sharing it more on LinkedIn because I think that there are a lot of folks paying attention to stuff on LinkedIn. So thank you to everybody.
Oh my God, you're on LinkedIn?
So one of my jobs, I have a boss, and she really insisted that our organization was put on LinkedIn, so I had no choice. It was like one of the few times where I was like, okay, fine, I'll do that. So
Wow.
yeah, but you know what?
Well, I'll try to find you and follow you there.
Oh my God.
I'm like I am never on LinkedIn, but as I discovered when you go to a professional school, like a law school, they make you make a LinkedIn. It's like a requirement. So anyway, I'll look out for you there.
Yeah, I've met some pretty good people through my messages there, but I have to say that the messages are mostly spam, so I really don't pay too much attention. But it is, we are there. We're sharing the podcast there because it's like, what better place to get your daily news than from LinkedIn. Okay, but for some gratitude. So thank you to everyone that shared the podcast this past week, but also thank you to everybody who donated to the podcast for the first time or changed their donation, especially Cheryl, Josh, and Justin.
Hey, thank you folks so much. Nora, can I say something that has like really been making me feel really great about the campus protests?
Ooh, yes, I need to hear that.
Oh my God. So, a lot of the like coverage, both in the United States and Canada are like about, they're just kind of trying to warp themselves into talking about how this is bad, either by saying that these protests are exclusionary. These folks are covering their face. They are preventing people from getting into the encampment. They are, like all sorts of stuff to vaguely say, that these folks, are not, just like some open place that anyone can join and anybody can walk into. And as a result, they must be bad because, I don't know, full open access is some sort of like universal virtue or whatever, I guess is the implication there, or perhaps even more of an implication like these people have something to hide. They're doing dastardly deeds behind these encampments. And I gotta say, I'm loving that about the encampments. I mean, you and I came up in a time of, well, not came up in, we were quite matured in the time of Occupy. And you and I will remember, and perhaps a lot of the people listening to this podcast will remember that actually there was this sort of assumption that it was a all-out virtue to have fully open spaces that anyone could come into and anyone could be a part of a democratic attempt at self-governance in some sort of Occupy type space that was trying to make change in society. And I remember always being a little bit frustrated about this because, and I mean, that's really clear in the sort of organizing that ended up happening with Black Lives Matter. Because it's just way too open for infiltration. It's way too open to being fucked with. People can come in, whether they are cops or just bad actors, to try to fuck with the thing that you're doing, distract, and completely tear down the action, even if it started out really impactful, which is quite frankly what happened with Occupy. One of the things that happened with Occupy. And to see like a new generation of activists not be swayed by that kind of language, be like, yeah, I don't give a fuck. Like, no, you are not welcome here. I don't know you. And I don't know what you're trying to do here, what you are attempting to accomplish by coming in here. And as a result, you're not allowed here. Like that is, yes, more of that. Like I love that there has been a deep shift in the kinds of things that we are expected to accept. And I really think it's a great kind of learning from previous activist movements.
Well, and it was also like there's a fundamental difference too, whereas with Occupy, the opponents of Occupy weren't using like these brown shirt tactics to try and fuck with people. Like the opponents of Occupy were in their office towers far away. I remember walking around Occupy once and coming across Bob Ray, of all people, and it was like, yeah, I don't know why you'd be here, Bob. What the fuck? But if Bob Ray wanted to check out a student encampment right now at U of T and he had to actually convince them to let him in, that's totally, I think, worthwhile. From nail gun buddy outside of a synagogue in North York to all of the violent attacks that we're seeing in the United States, I think that taking this very seriously is a winning strategy. And if you can be vouched for, then you're totally welcome. And if you can't be vouched for, either become vouchable, do something, make some friends, make some alliances, do the work, or get the fuck out of here. Like, it's not that difficult. So I'm really glad that you raised that, because it really does speak to a maturity in organizing in the encampments. And so congratulations. And to, especially to not back down in the face of journalists being like, bah, 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 bah. And I shouldn't say all journalists, but like some of the more like seasoned journalists who think that they've got the right to just walk in anywhere without like explaining themselves a little bit. It's just, it's there's a lot of pressure to make these encampments fall apart. And this is a really great way to try and protect that.
Yeah. And two things I'll say about that is like, one, if you are someone who like really just does, has the greatest of intentions and can't get into an encampment, like take a step back. Remember, it's not about you, and figure out another way to make sure that you are supporting the campaign to end the genocide in Gaza. Like that's what the campaign's about. It's not about you. And if it turns out that one sort of action that you would like to take is not something that you can take, then that's actually okay. You can figure out something else to do. I promise you, there's no short of things that you could do. And the other thing that I'll say is I did see some commentary from different sources of journalists on podcasts, some online, saying, oh my God, it is so weird. Like, we will go to the encampments and ask for comment from people who are a part of it, and they will say, oh no, I'm not the person to speak to. There's a media person. And these journalists are talking about that. Like, that's like, oh my God, can you imagine? Can you imagine that this is the way that these people are, like, they're trying to control all these folks. They're not letting people speak to the media. Number one, it's like, that is how like every other organization works. Every other organization.
Like, imagine walking into the fucking front office of, I don't even know, Suncor, and being like, hello, front desk individual. What do you think about tar sands emissions? Like,
exactly. Exactly. Let alone like politics or any, like, you respect that people have media spokespeople in other organizations, and it's like something that is clearly quite organized as these encampments. You should do the same. And number two, shout out once again to being really, really organized, so organized that people understand that this is, the stakes of this are quite high. And they're so high, in fact, that people should have really good media training, have a really good media strategy, and should perhaps limit those folks who are doing that media to particular designates who will be able to carry it out in the way that you want to. And I just, I'm just really, part of the reason why I said at the beginning that I'm so optimistic is that I know that this is going to be deeply impactful, not only for this particular campaign and this particular fight, but it's only going to help as people learn from these particular tactics as we continue to fight against other things in our society. So good on the campus folks who've learned those lessons and are carrying them out.
Totally. Okay, so let's take a small detour on this issue and talk about something completely different before we come back to really talk about what has happened at the campus encampments and police brutality and where all of that is at. Sandy, have you heard of Bill S-210?
Like vaguely, but tell me about it for real.
Mm-hmm. So some listeners to Sandy and Nora have been in touch and were like, you really, really, really need to talk about this piece of legislation because it's not getting any attention. And they're right. We do need to talk about this piece of legislation. So this bill S-210, S means that it's served by a senator, right? Usually it's a C and sometimes it's an S. And this one was served by independent Senator Julie Miville-Deschênes. And Miville-Deschênes' bill is trying to stop minors from accessing pornography on the internet. Sandy, can you think of anything less possible than that.
Yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, let's fight losing battles if that's what we need to do. Sure.
Yeah. So the bill, it's actually very thin. It doesn't really have much details about what the ways in which Canada is going to enforce this. But it has been sent to committee. It was the only party that's voted against it so far has been the Liberals. All the other parties agreed to send it to committee for further study. And that is where it is currently. Now, because it's so vague, it's like really open to interpretation for like, what does it mean to stop a minor from accessing certain websites online? And of course, there are some websites where there might be like pornographic material, but then also not pornographic material at all, right? So, this could range from anything from asking someone to put their age in to access the website or to confirm that they're 18 or over, all the way down to what many critics are very concerned about, which would be some sort of digital verification of identity. And so whether that's a digital ID or some sort of facial recognition or facial scanning to make sure that the person watching or looking at the website is indeed above 18. I mean, it's kind of like a massive can of worms. And as you can imagine, the tech side of people are very, very, very concerned. There are queer activists and artists and performers who are also very, very concerned. And because it's a private member's bill coming from a senator, it hasn't really gotten much attention. But I think that because of all of the language and discussions around digital ID, it is really interesting that this is being used to try and justify why we need to have more surveillance on internet users with the intention of stopping a 10-year-old from stumbling across Pornhub, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the text of the bill, and it is like it is super weird. It's like in that there is no information, and there is an article on Extra that says that the MP, who is the bill sponsor in the House, Karen Vecchio, has said that they want to rely on technology as a way for age verification. So they are not. This is not just like the pop-up of "Are you 18?" But it's like how. I mean, my first thought on all of this is that the fact that this, porn is the issue through which we are thinking about tackling the anonymity of the online spaces and how it can be harmful is bizarre. But I mean, like how would you use technology to do that? I mean, how do we do it in the real world? It does seem like no matter how you slice it, this is going to be an issue for privacy. And I mean, the way that our private lives or our faces connected to our names, our images, the full dismantling of that and how behind our policymakers are on that. I mean, it's really quite scary, and that could bring us back actually to the campus protests. So put a pin on that. But like, this is something that makes me quite nervous. I don't know how they're going to be able to do it successfully, right? Like you use a VPN, like who is the target? Is it going to be the people who are making the language of the bill is sexually explicit, the people who are commercially using sexually explicit material online or selling sexually explicit material online? Is it the internet service providers? Who is ultimately supposed to be responsible? Who are they targeting with this? And then, like with any rule on the internet, there's always going to be a workaround because that's just the way that the internet functions. So like, what is the purpose here? So I'm quite interested in how this is going to develop. But suffice to say, like, again, as we've said before, there are so many issues with our privacy, with communications, with the internet as a whole. It just seems weird that this is the priority for the folks who've served this.
Well, it's also so ridiculous too, because it's like, first of all, like if a digital ID is attached to a device, let's say, kids can use the parents' devices. Like, what would be stopping that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so then we're talking about even more invasive kinds of technology to make sure that a child's not, just logged into their parents' computer or whatever. And then the other side of it is like, I'm, as you were talking, imagining like, imagine Canada actually ever created its own web crawler. Imagine we actually had tools to, prioritize or emphasize certain things over other things. Like, the internet is more controlled now than it's ever been. And we have absolutely no control over that. Like, there is no democratic control over these spaces. And so you're not going to get it with Karen Vecchio being like, oh my God, I'm going to have a digital ID. That woman, by the way, is, actually, I'll leave it at that. So yeah, it's like another one of these conservative women who are just like so horrible and not very smart. And it's like, why do you exist? Why do you exist here? Couldn't you exist anywhere else? Like running your own fucking boat somewhere, not bothering people. Anyway, so like definitely something to pay a very, very close attention to. And to, keep in mind all of the social issues that are wrapped up into this in general. And that, like, I don't know, who protected my classmates from walking to school one morning when we all saw a naked card deck on the ground scattered everywhere? Nobody. It's like, oh my God, look at that. That's it, So, good work. Good work, conservatives, policing the internet once again.
Yeah. Also, so this week I listened to another podcast, which was talking about the advancements or like the weirdness of like the Clearview AI system. You've heard of that, yeah?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you,
tell us about that.
Of you who haven't, Clearview AI, being a company that has, I think since like 2014 or something like that, crawled the internet for images of our faces. It just has collected images of our faces, much like, the other sort of AI chatbots that we've all been hearing about in the last little bit have crawled the internet, collecting all of the words on the internet to become really smart at language and speaking to people. Clearview AI has basically done that, but for photos of people's faces. And they have licensed the use of that technology to police forces in the United States and other countries as well to identify potential perpetrators. And so police officers will, in the course of whatever the fuck they do, take an image of a suspect that they potentially have, feed it through a Clearview AI system, who will find a match and say, it is likely that this person is this person, or this person looks this much like this person. And that has led to actual arrests out in the real world. Now, of course, you may have heard of this technology because there have been some pretty widely reported stories of the technology getting it wrong, especially with respect to Black people. Find, like, surprise, the technology thinks that Black people look alike too much, and so has been telling police officers, like, this person likely is this person. They go out and effect an arrest. Turns out it's absolutely not that person. Anyway, all of this is to say, this privacy issue that I was alluding to earlier, it's like, okay, so there's this particular company has used images on Venmo, which is like the American version of e-transfer, except for people put their faces on there. I don't know why. and don't ask me, using Venmo, using LinkedIn, using Facebook, and when you put those images of yourself online, you didn't know that you were signing up for it to end up in some sort of library for cops. Well, it turns out that while Clearview AI has had a lot of eyes on it because of all of the stories that have been written about it and the investigations, there are more systems that have been developed to search in the same way as ChatGPT to search photos on the internet and identify people, match a name to a face. And so with all of that happening, with that sort of encroachment into privacy, which is all for profit and commercial gain, I mean, when you are on campus or when you are out on the streets engaged in protest, that is another level of danger and of risk that people need to think of. And again, it's one of the things that I'm looking at when I'm looking at the folks who are doing these protests on campus and noticing that they are covering their faces and unabashedly doing so and not giving a shit when people are like, why are you covering your faces? I mean, that's one of the reasons. It's like we're living in a world where your face being recognized, the ability for technology to do that and to get that information about who you are to the police is more and more and more possible. And so it is good. It is very, very good that the folks who are taking these actions on campus are thinking about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, Clearview AI has been around for a while as a company in general, but also with doing its fuckery in Canada. Back in 2021, there was a workshop put on at Toronto Metropolitan University. And I'm just looking at an article from Rochelle Ravindran from the Eye Opener there. And this article, as I say, so 2021 reminds us that Canada's Privacy Commissioner said that Clearview AI has violated federal and provincial laws by collecting millions of photos of Canadians from social media networks and like Facebook and other public websites without their consent. Clearview AI created 48 accounts for law enforcement agencies and organizations across Canada before the company withdrew from the Canadian market in July. So, very, very important to mention that as things are getting so heated in protest land all across North America. And, I guess maybe before we talk about how heated things are getting in protest land, I want to back up and say, like, where are things at in Rafah? Now, I'm sure everybody's reading the news. There's been like heavy bombardment in the north of Gaza. People in Rafah are being told to evacuate. They can't evacuate anywhere. And there's a sweep happening from one end of the city to another by the Israeli military. If you look at the PR from the Israeli military, they say that they're setting up field hospitals and they're giving out food and they're doing all of these humanitarian things, while at the same time the death toll just continues to climb from Israeli weapons. And I was talking to a friend of mine whose family is all in Gaza, and they were saying that it's just scorched earth. Like the whole plans, Israel's whole plans right now are scorched earth in Rafah. They've closed the Rafah border crossing. So as anybody is trying to get people out of Gaza, this is now no longer possible. They didn't just close it, they destroyed it, and Israel took it over from Egypt. And so people are very, very much trapped in a way that they have not yet been trapped before. I mean, there were very few people leaving the border crossing before. In the earliest days of the war, there'd be something like 200 people allowed to leave, and then that increased. But now nobody can leave. And so as we look at what's going on campuses, and as we look at the way that people are talking about this, I think it's really important to just, remind everybody of where things are and why people are taking radical action, because it feels like now is absolutely like now or never. Gotta do that. And at the same time, we have someone like Jeremy Levi, who is the mayor of Hampstead, which is a small town in Quebec. And he just posted on Twitter a picture of Edmonton police beating the fuck out of protesters. And Levi's comments are this: here in Edmonton, it's encouraging to witness Canada taking a stand against such unacceptable behavior. It's regrettable that such measures are necessary to address those who express support for Hamas. It's time for Montreal to also take action and disband the McGill encampment. So, that all being said, what has this week brought us in protest land?
Well, I think important to talk about that, but just before we get there, I want to just add one other thing to what you've said about the context. By and large, politicians, whether you're Doug Ford or Joe Biden or whomever the fuck else, have been saying, like, these protests, they're not doing much. We respect the right for them to happen, but they are not changing much in terms of how people are responding. And that is absolute bullshit. And nothing, I mean, the actions of policymakers this week have made that super, super clear. From Canada changing its abhorrent vote in terms of recognition for Palestinian statehood from no to an abhorrent abstention, it's still significant that Canada has shifted its position in that way, and to the fact that Biden has had to change the way that he's not only talking about the war, but what he is actually saying to Israel and Israeli officials, to making some changes as to what sorts of military support the United States will be providing to Israel. And if folks are looking at that situation and thinking that the uprisings that are happening all over the fucking world aren't related to them in election years, like, give me a fucking break. Of course they are. And so that context that you have provided, Nora, of like what the dire situation is of Israel trapping people and bombarding them. Obviously, we should be taking as much action as we can, and we absolutely are having an impact on the political situation.
Totally. So this past week, we saw violent breaking up of encampments, particularly at the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta. And many people pointed out how unbelievably different the cops are treating peaceful anti-genocide protesters as they treated, pro-fascist, white supremacist organizing that's happened in the last number of years. And one of the things that I feel like, oh God, I guess I've been around for a while, but I'm brought back to the G20 in Toronto so much in seeing these videos and the tactics that they're doing, and the way that they're just not allowing protesters to be where they have every right to be. And I remember, running from the police in Toronto during the G20 and thinking, like, this is just a fucking exercise for them. This is just them training and learning how to do different kinds of crowd control and knowing where the limits are, what they're going to get in trouble for, and what they are going to be allowed to get away with. And, Alberta seems like the place that it would be easiest for the cops to get away with this stuff. The Calgary police are deeply racist. All cops are, but, they have many situations of outward violence, police brutality towards racialized people in that city. The Edmonton police are arguably even worse than the Calgary police, having violently breaking up encampments of people who have nowhere else to live. And, not so long ago, literally chasing a man to his death in the North Saskatchewan River in Edmonton. And so I'm not surprised that that's where we're seeing the most amount of violence so far, and not from, let's say Toronto police or from Montreal police yet. But watching this is like, just reminds you what is at stake. And if these protests didn't matter, if what was going on had no impact on public policy, there would be no violent breaking up of them, because there'd be no reason to have to violently remove them. And so that, I think we have to keep in mind as we're watching how the state responds to people who are making the unreasonable and radical demand of stopping a genocide.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable. Just like the way that cops act in general, actually. But I mean, I'm hoping that this is opening some eyes to what the purpose of the police really is. It's like these police officers have used chemical weapons against youth who are sitting down in a field on their campuses to say, we don't want our money going towards genocidal acts. These people are sat on a campus with tents and, you know, with food, supporting one another. And they came fully dressed for a fight as though they were going to war, the police. If you see the images, it's actually really stunning to see how the state thinks about people exercising their supposed freedom to say, no, actually, this is not how I want my public institution to run, especially if I am supporting that public institution through a user fee. Why would that be responded to with all of this violence? Well, only if that protest itself had some sort of impact, was a risk to the status quo, and so much of a risk to the status quo that it needed to be responded with force and violence, such that you could try to take the right to say anything away from these folks. And not only that, to arrest these folks, to suspend, in the case of the institutions, in some cases to suspend and threaten expulsion against these folks. Politicians like Doug Ford saying it's time to clear these things out. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Just a few short years ago, I remember the conversations about campuses being so resistant to free speech, about how conservative students on campus were not able to raise their voices because the campus was so unkind to different types of thought. I have never seen anything like that lobbed against conservative students. Now, hear this right now, what is happening across Canada, across the United States, across the world on campuses to try to blot out these protests. That is a real attack on free speech. That is what fascism looks like. And that's something that we should all be concerned about, especially the people who have been touting this free speech line for fucking decades. But they're not, because they never were concerned about free speech, were they?
It's actually amazing to see how this comes full circle, because like all of the attacks on Israeli apartheid week for over many, 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 many years, all of the fake allegations of anti-Semitism every time you wanted to talk about Palestine. You know, I just found a copy of the newspaper that I used to edit, which was called the Ryerson Free Press, and the copy was from 2010. I shared it online in case you're curious to see the articles that I shared. And there were 2 articles about Gaza and doing campus activism for Gaza and for Palestine, and all of the smears that are thrown at activists who try to do that kind of work, regardless of who's involved, including when it's Jewish students organizing these kinds of events. And there was also articles about Haiti and about Congo, and it was like, oh my God, we are just stuck in like a rut in terms of global news that just is not getting better, because the West refuses to allow things to get better, and things always have to get worse. But, you know, it seems like finally there is space that has been created, and it wasn't created out of thin air. It's been taken, and it's been taken in a moment where it felt like campus organizing was so impossible. And so for me, that is like the most exciting part of watching how this stuff unfolds. And then the question is, of course, well, what's next? Like, what are then the next steps of the state? And what are the next steps of people in power? As you say, it is a victory. It's a pathetic victory, but it's a victory that Canada has gone from voting against to abstaining on a UN vote related to Palestinian statehood. it's that's not where we were last year, right? That's certainly not where we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So that's great that it is a very pathetic victory, but a wonderful victory as anyway. At the same time, though, you have the city of Toronto about to raise the Israeli flag to celebrate Israel's Independence Day.
So
and
fucking
that's in
shameful.
A city where a whole
so
lot
fucking
of
shameful.
Yeah, and that's in a city where a whole lot of so-called progressive people were like, vote for this progressive mayor, and they can't even be like, you know what, we're gonna fucking sit this one out because Israel's kind of like not doing it right now. No, they're gonna raise the flag, and so we're gonna see, I think, more of these kinds of manifestations of support for Israel, and they're gonna be more and more pathetic or contrived or weak. Right? Last week there was also this like very silly press conference that was talking about anti-Semitism on campus, being led by Anthony Housefather, the MP from the Liberals, and had a bunch of average students who are just like, you know, mired in anti-Semitism on their campus, and they just can't handle it. And of course, most journalists did not look into who the students were and find out that they're actually like very, very active Zionist activists on their campuses. So this kind of thing is going to continue and continue. But the more that the movement grows, the less space and the less legitimacy those kinds of countermeasures are going to actually they're going to enjoy. And we. I mean, the only way we win this is by continuing to take up oxygen from them, to take up space from them, and to continue to spread understandings of what is happening that are close to what is happening, and rejecting these kinds of these lies that we're still, I mean, I'm still surprised to hear someone say like, it's Hamas's fault, which of course was yelled at the Politics in the Pen event last week for the Shaughnessy Cohen Prize, which is a prize for best political writing in Canada, because they couldn't stand that an author got on stage and said, let us remember the children who are starving in Gaza. And that was too much for the establishment in this country.
That's so, I mean, like, even just listening to those words said, like, in the proximity that you've said them, like, do people not, does everybody else not like listening, looking around, like listen to that and think, what is my reality? Like nothing makes sense. Like I just like, let us remember the children responded with, it's Hamas's fault. Fuck off. Like, what are you talking about? What are you saying right now? Who are you responding to? What words are you responding to? What message are you trying to send? Is the implication of what you're trying to send that the children deserve it? Like, no, shut up. Like, what are you contributing to this? It is so weird to continue to see some people hang on to these thinner and thinner threads of responses that have been accepted for so long, but never made any sense. And now they make even less sense as Israel has made it very, very clear what their goal is. And the entire world, whether you are an average person who is just listening to the news, or you're engaged in protest, or you're a country who's decided to cut off diplomatic ties, it's like the entire world knows what's really going on. You know, there's no more threads to hang on to. And yet those threads, people are hanging on to them for dear life. And we are living in a country that is also hanging on to those threads for what purpose? Like, it is obvious what's happening now. And now, for all these people who are the decision makers, for all of these people who are writing the stories, who are doing the reporting, it's on you. You can no longer try to pretend that something else is happening. The wool has been removed. Okay, that there's no more smoke. We know what's happening, and so it's on you. Like, you are making a decision actually now about whether or not you support or will use your power to support genocide or not.